What's up, students? It's your boy PGT. Welcome back to another class. Today I'll be sharing with you how I do no soak, no simmer, as well as explain some pros and cons between the no soak, no simmer and the traditional soak method, so you can decide which one's right for you. It's really a preference, and oftentimes I prefer the traditional soak method because I know the grains will be well hydrated. So for no soak, no simmer, I've been able to make this work with millet, oats, and bird seeds. I'm sure it could work with a few other grains as well. So these are the finished grain jars from doing the no soak, no simmer tech. The main reason why you might want to use this tech is to save time. You don't have to soak your grains. It's a really fast prep job to get everything going and ready to be sterilized. One of the downsides is that you have dirty looking jars from all the little small particles in the grains that weren't washed out during the proper soak. This shouldn't interfere with the mycelium growing, as everything in the jar will be sterilized anyway, but it could make spotting contamination a little bit harder inside the jar when everything's kind of like muddied up. Alright, real quickly here, I'm going to go over the pros and cons to the no soak, no simmer versus the traditional soak and simmer methods. So the first thing I want to point out is this is fast prep. You're literally just dumping grains and water together into a jar and then you're pressure cooking it. So you're saving a lot of time by doing this tech. So the second thing I want to point out is if you're doing the jars, you can only do 7 jars at a time in the 23 or 22 quart pressure cookers. So typically you can lay about 3 regular mouth quart mason jars on their sides on top of the layer of 7 to be able to fit 10 total in your pressure canner. But with the no soak, no simmer, what happens is water is going to be leaking out the lid when the jars are flipped on their sides. Another con here is you're going to get dirty looking jars once they're done sterilizing. And the last thing is you have to shake up the jars when they're hot. So when you're done sterilizing and the pressure canner has reduced down to 0 psi on its own, and you can safely open up the pressure canner, then what you want to do is remove the jars and give them a shake. Now this step is important to this tech because if you don't redistribute the moisture right away in the jars, you'll end up with dry spots in your grains and mycelium won't be able to colonize that. Alright, so now here's some pros and cons on the traditional soak and simmer methods. So when you soak your grains and you simmer them, you get properly hydrated grains. Now this is going to take some time to prep, obviously, so if you have a lot of time on your hands and you don't mind, soaking your grains for 24 hours and then simmering them, this is the traditional method that I prefer to use personally. And with the traditional soak and simmer method, you can fit 10 jars into your Presto pressure canner. Since the grains are fully hydrated, you don't have to worry about any type of water leaking out of the jars and they're on their sides. And of course, you don't have to do the hot shake with this method because your grains are already fully hydrated. So you don't have to redistribute moisture or anything, you just let the pressure canner cool down on its own, take the jars out the next day, and they're ready to use. So let's get started here on the prep work. First thing you'll need is a quart jar. That's around 32 ounce for the people in the other parts of the world. And we're going to measure out our millet. So I add enough millet to reach around 350 milliliters. Kind of just using based off of the lines on the jars. Wherever we need a weight, it's about 265 grams of millet. Next up, we're going to add water. And to this, we're going to be adding 150 milliliters of water. The reason I keep things around the 350 milliliter markings on the jar is because the grains will be expanding, almost like double the size as it soaks up the water in the pressure cook cycle. After you add the water, just put your lids on your jars, and now they're ready to get sterilized. Next up, we're going to do oats. So we're going to measure out here about 300 milliliters, or roughly 185 grams. Because the oats are a bigger grain, they're going to absorb more water compared to the millets, so we have to adjust the recipe to account for that. Now we're going to add water, so we're adding about 215 milliliters of water to this jar. Right now we're going to add our lid. So I'm using a modified lid for these. Pretty much just drilled a 1/4-inch hole into them, and then I covered them up with microprocess filter patch. I have links in the description below if you're interested in getting them for yourself. Next up, we're doing bird seeds. So with the bird seeds, it's pretty much the same recipe as the oats. So what I'm going to do is measure out about 300 milliliters of the bird seeds, and then I'm going to add 215 milliliters of water. give it a little swirl, and now put the lid on, and they're ready to get sterilized. So we're going to run them for 90 minutes at 15 psi. After 90 minutes is up, turn off the heat and wait until the pressure is back down to 0 so that it's safe to open them up. The next step here is called the hot shake. So we take our jars out of the pressure canner carefully because they are hot, and now we're going to shake them up in order to redistribute the moisture in them so that it's more of an even consistency. So some of the grains will be dry, some of the grains are much more wet than the other, so as you shake them up they kind of touch each other, and then the dry grains wick up moisture from the wet grains as they cool down. So here's the hot shake with the oats jar. Make sure you have a pair of oven mitts on so you can handle these, and then just shake them around and get them evenly mixed up as best as you can. Next up we have our bird seeds. This is kind of how it looks. Now notice the bird seeds kind of get a little bit more clumping towards the bottom where the grains have been sitting in the water. So we have to spend a little time to break everything apart and make sure it's mixed up. Here are the millet jars. These are pretty easy to shake and mix around since the grains are so small. They're just much easier to work with. So give them a good shaking. And now we kind of let the jars cool down on their own a little bit. Here's a close-up of the 3 different jars. So you can use this as reference when you're making your own jars at home. Now let them sit there and we'll come back here the next day to check up on them. So this is what they look like the next day. The old jars are a bit messy. See all the sliminess is kind of in there. Doesn't look pretty, but it works. You'll still be able to colonize mycelium just fine in these jars. Alright, now you have grain jars that are ready to be inoculated with. So I use these same jars in my Lion's Mane Grow video. I have links in the description if you're interested in checking that video out. And that's it for the No Soak No Simmer. Let me know in the comments below if you've done No Soak No Simmer before and how do you like it. Alright, real quick, I just want to give a shout out to the Patreon members that support this channel. If you aren't a member of the PGT fam yet, it's definitely something you might want to look into if you're getting into mycology hobby. On there you can talk to me one-on-one, you can receive discounts from my shop, Patreon community Discord server, as well as exclusive Patreon only content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.